Somewhere between 15 and 16 years ago, I had a crazy experience. I had met this girl. I invited her out on a date, and so we walk into this little pub, and we are hanging out, and as I recall it, I'm from the South, and so what do you drink when you're trying to relax? You drink sweet tea, right? So I order a sweet tea at Kildare's, and the waitress kind of looks at me a little bit odd, like, okay, so that's kind of weird. And the girl I was with orders something else, and about 5 minutes later, this waitress comes walking out with this English tea set. And it literally, like, there's this, like, cauldron of boiling hot tea, and there's a ton of sugar packets there. And she goes, your sweet tea. And I just busted out laughing, right, because I'm from the South. Sweet tea is like a thing. It means you put a little bit of tea and then like 800 packets of sugar, and it's served on ice, and we just know what sweet tea is, right? And so I and this girl begin laughing, and we kind of begin to make small talk, and I send the hot tea back and order like a beer or something more apparently normal and regional. And anyway, we begin talking, right? And over the course of this conversation, I really begin to enjoy myself, and I can tell she's doing the same. And we begin talking more and more, and the conversation gets better and better, and we really enjoy it. And after what seemed like a very short amount of time, we realized we've been here for a couple hours, it's probably time to leave. And that experience began something which has had a profound impact on my life. I knew about this girl, I had met her before in class, but as I began to get to know her, who she was came out more and more, and it began to have a bigger impact on me. And so we started seeing each other more and more, and we were so intrigued by each other that, like, we were both working. I was working a part-time job, going to school full-time, tons of hours into that, very little spare time, helping lead a youth group. She worked full-time, was taking classes, helping lead a youth group, and incredibly enough, we couldn't find time for much else, but we could be on the phone from like midnight until 4 a.m. every night, sleep like 3 hours, do our jobs, come home exhausted, and then we were back on the phone again, right? Because something happened. I was so intrigued and drawn in by who she was and she with me that we literally could not stop communicating. Our relationship went from knowing about to knowing more deeply. We were drawn deeper and deeper. And then a couple years after that, we did this crazy thing that I'm sure you've experienced before, where I'm standing up at the front of a very large church. Like there's a couple other people there. It's very hot. It's a July day. We're sweating because there's no air conditioning. And then suddenly, after 15 minutes of waiting, which was another story in itself because no one went to tell the bride it was time to walk down the aisle, so I'm waiting. I'm really starting to sweat because I'm worried what's going on. Finally, the door's open. There she is, boom, organ blast, and she comes walking down the aisle. And in that moment, everything that had been building up for years finally began to come to a head. This was happening, and my life was changing. And in that moment, something was transformed in me and in her and with us that could never go back. It was a profound moment. This morning in Mark, we are going to look at a profound moment in the people who knew Jesus very well. Something's going to shift in the way they think about him this morning that's going to leave them forever changed. They can no longer remain as they are. They're going to be drawn in and transformed. So let me start reading. Mark chapter 4. I'm going to start reading in verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, that's the disciples, let's go across to the other side. So in the larger context, Jesus has been teaching. He's been doing lots of miracles. He's been telling people who God is and what he's up to, and he's been backing it up with supernatural acts. And people are starting to recognize him and say, ooh, this guy is supernaturally empowered. He must be a prophet. He must be someone who speaks for God. And his authority is backed up by the things he does, because he's healing people. He's doing supernatural things. And so he begins to teach, and suddenly, not just a couple people are there, lots and lots of people show up to hear him teach. He's becoming known across the area as a great teacher, as someone through whom God is speaking. And so on this day, he's been teaching lots of people. He's been saying parables. He's been teaching them things about the kingdom of God. It's a big deal. And if you know anything about teaching, any teachers here, it is exhausting. I have no idea how, especially elementary school teachers, survive an entire day. Like, I teach for 30, 45 minutes, and I'm done. Jesus has been teaching out in the hot sun to lots of people for an entire day. So you can imagine how he feels. He's done, right? So on that particular day, when he'd been doing all this teaching, evening comes, everybody's going home. He says to his disciples, let's go across to the other side, right? He's been teaching along the shores of a lake. It's called Lake Tiberias. It's in Galilee. It's a rather large lake. It's 13 miles long and about 8 miles wide. So it's a pretty good-sized lake. And he says to them, hey guys, let's cross over. Let's get away from the crowds. Let's cross over. I need some rest. Let's get away from everybody. So they all jump into the boat, verse 36, and leaving the crowd, they, that's the disciples, took him with them in the boat just as he was. Nothing special. He's tired, hops in the boat, they pull him in. These guys are fishermen, they know boats very well. They're probably boat owners, so this is kind of their trade, right? We know his disciples were fishermen. We know they spent tons of time on the sea, on the lake. This is normal for them. Verse 36, and other boats were with him. So it's not just one. There's a couple boats. This is kind of a weird, interesting start to a story. It's all these random details. We got to say, what's the point? Why do we need to know that they took him with him just as he was? Why do we need to know that there's other boats there with him? And part of the answer is, this is probably someone recounting an eyewitness event. Most likely, we think this is actually the Apostle Peter telling a story that he experienced. This isn't just him recounting something that someone told him. He is remembering this because he was there. There's all these random details involved that make no sense unless you were there, and it's just like you remembered it. Verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. The Sea of Galilee, or Lake Tiberias, is an unusual lake in that it's 700 feet below sea level. So if something incredible happened and like a vast, Grand Canyon opened up between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sea of Galilee, water would flow in and it would go up 700 feet. So this is really, really low in the area, right? And it means the humidity and heat are very high around this lake. And around the edges of the lake, there are mountains that rise up about 2,000 feet above sea level. So there's a huge difference between the tops of the mountains and the cool, dry air and the low-down lake where the air is very warm and very humid. Now, I'm from South Carolina. I live right next to the mountains. You're probably like, well, duh, he's from South Carolina. We can hear it in the way he says y'all and his southern drawl, and we have a hard time understanding him. I'm from South Carolina, right? We live in the shadows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And because of that, we have very interesting weather. Because of the vast change in temperature, things can go from relatively clear in the summertime when it's hot and humid to incredibly huge storms. They've been having tornadoes roll through the south this week. It's been pretty crazy. Same thing happens here. This area is known for having dramatic storms come out of nowhere and explode onto the scene in this lake. In 1992, one of these huge storms just exploded on the Sea of Galilee, and there were people parked in this little town just off the coast, 50 or 60 feet away from the shoreline. They thought their cars were safe. The town thought it was built far enough away, and these ginormous 10-foot waves hit the shore, roll up the beach, swamp cars, begin to break into this village, begins to destroy stuff. This is a big storm, right? Same type things going on. This is a major storm. This is not a little, windstorm, a little bit of thunder and lightning. This is a major storm. These storms are common. This great windstorm rises up. They're out in the boat. These boats, we know because we've actually dug one up. The fishing boats at this time, they were not like your little John boat that you take out to go bass fishing. This is a 27-foot long boat. Easily could hold 15, 20 people. 7.5 feet wide. The shortest area along the side is 4.5 feet tall. These are large boats, right? The fact that this is being swamped by water, that waves are breaking into the boat, means the waves are at least 4 feet high. We know we've seen them at least 10 feet high. These waves are huge. They are breaking into the boat. Now, if you're like me and you're not a fisherman, I would be terrified, right? We are going down. The water's coming in. When boats, as we know from bathtubs and 5-year-olds and 3-year-olds, I know from personal experience, if you want a boat to sink, you fill it up with water, right? That's what's going on here. And I want to give you an idea, I want to give you the sense, there is real danger here. This is not just something, it's a little storm. This is the way people die on the Sea of Galilee. We've dug up multiple shipwrecks. Why? Because storms came, boats filled with water, and people died. This is real. Verse 38. 12 disciples in the boat with Jesus, and you kind of expect something to happen, and instead, this is what you find. But he, Jesus, was asleep in the stern, on the cushion. So in these boats, they were steered by this thing called a tiller. It was kind of a long paddle turned on its side, and there was usually a seat at the back of the boat, because the front and the back of the boat usually had platforms that you could sit up on. And most likely, Jesus is up on the platform, out of the way of the water, and he's so exhausted, he passes out, right? And there's a cushion usually set in the back that the guy who's got to sit there and steer the boat out in the hot sun would sit on. Instead, Jesus kind of steals the cushion, leans over, passes out, and he's done. And if you've ever been on a boat and been tired, I got to go on a couple trips to the Bahamas when I was younger, and we would rent a large 47-foot boat, and I and my dad and a couple other guys would crew the boat for a week, and you'd work really hard, and by the end of the day, as soon as the sun begins to go down, you are exhausted because you've been out in the sun, you've been working your butt off. It's just exhausting. And the breeze begins to blow, and the boat begins to rock, and your head hits the pillow, and you are done. And Jesus, despite the fact there's a storm rolling, is done. And they, the disciples, woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Right? He's out cold, and they grab him. You can imagine him grabbing, shaking him. "Teacher, get up. We are dying. The boat is filling with water. We are not going to make it. Get up. What are you doing?" And you kind of got to love the honesty that Mark here records. It's not just a statement of, hey, I don't feel like you care about. It's an accusation. You don't care about us. Right? Because their understanding is, Jesus, if you knew what we were going through, and if you understood the situation that we were in, you would do something. Get what's going on in their mind, because we work a lot like this also. By us seeing what's going on in my life in the middle of this storm, the fact that I am here and you are here and you're doing nothing obviously means, God or Jesus, you don't care. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in a place where you were in such a storm, such craziness, such insanity, the world did not make sense, everything's blowing up, death is on the horizon, that you felt just like this? That you could say to the God of creation, "Don't you care?" And if you haven't been there, you haven't lived long enough yet, right? Because at some point, this kind of storm is coming for all of us. And they look at Jesus, and in a way that seems pretty offensive and accusatory, they say, "Don't you care that we are," the word there is perishing or dying, or literally, we are being destroyed. The boat's going down, people are dying, and what are you doing? Jesus is back beside the tiller, literally asleep at the wheel. What a crazy story. Verse 39, "And he awoke, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.'" So it's kind of funny, like he's really out, right? And it's like he pops up, and he rebukes the wind. It's a hilarious term. So that term is never used or rarely used with inanimate objects. An inanimate object is something that's not like alive. So like when I think of rebuke, we used to have a dog. I cried over the dog last week, not going to go down that road again. However, the dog was both at the receiving end of much affection and also much yelling, right? Ernie, stop that, right? Because he had this problem where we called him the lickaholic, right? So people would come over, hang out for lunch, and he would just sit there and lick them, and they would get driven nuts, and we would get driven nuts. And so we tried everything. We tried spraying vinegar on his tongue. We tried peppers. We tried everything we could think of to get this stupid dog to stop licking. Never worked. So the only thing we knew how to do, and the only thing that seemed to work was yell, right? As soon as he walked in and started licking someone, we'd yell, Ernie, stop it! And then we'd put him outside. We would rebuke our dog, because we knew the dog could understand and the dog would respond. Or if you have kids, you may have done this once or twice. Stop that, right? You're trying to get their attention. The one thing none of us, hopefully, otherwise you're probably crazy, have never done is yell at the wind, right? That makes no sense. It's a ridiculous, foolish thing to do, because the wind, as we all know, does not respond. I have yelled at inanimate objects before, simply out of frustration. I try my hand at doing construction work from time to time and improving our house, and what has happened is I've hit myself with a hammer. And in that moment, I do yell at the hammer, and I usually throw it, and something terrible gets broken in the process. And you know what? It doesn't change the hammer at all, right? If you've been there, you know what I mean. It doesn't change anything. And instead, in a crazy way, Jesus speaks to and rebukes, treats the wind like a person. He calls it out. And then he says to the sea, which is a pretty good translation, sea, the word there is actually, he says to, and for some reason it seems to capture it better, he says to the lake. Can you imagine talking to a body of water? He says to the lake, and I don't like the translation here, peace, be still. That's not a good translation. It's more like, peace, be still. The better translation, according to multiple translators, is, shut up. That's the word I used with my dog when he was driving me nuts, barking at someone in the middle of the night, waking up my newborn daughter. Shut up. So Jesus rebukes wind, speaks to a lake, says to the lake, shut up, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. So get what happens. Someone does something mildly insane, and then it responds. Can you imagine yelling at a hammer in your hand that you just crushed your thumb with and saying, stop it, don't do it again, and the hammer kind of leans over and droops? It'd be weird. It's a lot, though, like speaking to like a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. You can yell and you can do everything, and they just keep doing what they're going to do, right? For the rest of us, no matter how much we yell, cajole, try to get something to do something, nothing happens. And the opposite's true of Jesus. This guy just speaks, and the world shifts. It moves. It obeys. And it isn't just that the wind ceases, it's the wind cuts off. And Mark's kind of funny. He doesn't just say, and suddenly there was calm. He says, there was a great calm. The word there is mega. There was a big calm. Everything just stopped, right? You've probably seen this before when you've been on a lake. You'll get up early in the morning, you'll walk out to the lake, and everything's calm, and you can look out and you can see the water, and they say often that the water is like glass, right? You can look, and it's just so incredibly smooth. Maybe you've experienced that. It's amazing. That's what Mark's saying. The water goes from turmoil, high wind, and storm to the wind cuts out, and suddenly it's supernaturally smooth. He said to them, so he's talking to the disciples, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? So the ESV here is actually softening it, but most of the ancient copies of this, there's no so. So literally, word for word, it's just, why are you afraid? It's kind of a weird thing to say. Like, if I'm on a boat that's filling up with water and I am a mariner, someone who is a sailor, someone who is out at sea. Boat begins to fill with water, wind's picking up, boat begins to sink. I begin to get this thing called fear, right? I am afraid. The word almost is like cowardice. He's almost accusing the guy. He's like, hey, why are you this afraid of this? Like, yeah, you should be concerned, but you should not be to this point. You are freaking out. And on one hand, I'm kind of sympathizing with the disciples, right? Because death is a real possibility. They've probably had friends that have drowned. They've known the story. Ships have gone down. Lots of ships at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. This is a real possibility for them that they might end up dead. I want you to notice what it is that Jesus says and how crazy it is. What he says is, why are you afraid? The implication is you should not be afraid like this. You should not be afraid. What is he going to say? Have you still no faith? It's funny, he drops the word still in there. Like, by this time or at this point, because of all you've seen, you should at this point have faith that should calm your fears, where you should be able to actually deal with what's going on. So it's kind of a mild rebuke, right? He's calling them out. Why are you so afraid? Have you at this point still no faith? And remember what they've seen firsthand. They've seen dead people raised to life. They've seen lepers cleansed and healed. They've seen demons cast out. They've seen people who are incredibly sick, disabled, even paralyzed, start walking. And he's saying, by this point, you should be at the place where you have faith. And notice the word here, no faith. Have you still no faith? For some of us, I want to draw this point out because it's kind of a big deal. We think God's kind of this hard being who, if he actually discovers who we are and realizes our faith is very small or maybe even non-existent, he's going to kick us out, right? You're out of the club. Your dodgeball skills are nil. Therefore, you're off the team. And I want you to notice and just pause and draw attention to this. Jesus completely calls them out. By this time, you guys should have faith. Why are you so afraid? How can you still have no faith? And that's not what happens. He doesn't toss them off the boat. He doesn't say, on to the next crowd. And this is so encouraging if you're somebody like me who struggles. Because it's Jesus saying, hey, I know completely how jacked up you are. I know every experience you've had with me when you've seen me work. And it's tempting for us to think, at this point, he's just going to be done and walk away with me. And notice, that's not what happens. He totally calls them out. And then he totally keeps investing in them for the rest of their lives. And he's patient and he's gentle, but he does call them out. Verse 41, this is hilarious. And they were filled with great fear. So get it. They're on this boat. They are scared of death. Death is a real possibility. They are afraid. And notice what happens now. This guy speaks. The whole earth morphs into his will. And now, what are they? They are utterly terrified. That's that word big again, mega. They go from being a little bit cowardice at the size of a storm, fear of death, generally something you could justify being afraid of, and then they realize, who in heaven's name is in this boat with us? And now they are utterly terrified. Can you imagine being in a place where one minute you're really afraid you're going to die, and we'd all say, yeah, that's being really afraid. And suddenly you realize the thing that you are in the boat with is far more terrifying than the storm that was about to kill me, right? So years ago, not saying this is good parenting, so probably don't do it, but I begged my dad to stay up and watch a horror movie with him. Like, I remember this. I remember where I was. I remember the couch. I remember which direction the couch was. I remember the TV being there. And I said, hey, Dad, this movie Aliens, which is about these Marines who go in and fight these aliens on this planet, like, it's like, hey, Dad, I really want to stay up and watch it. And he's like, I don't think that's a good idea. And I was like, no, really, I can take it, right? Bad idea. Should have gone with Dad's intuition. I fought him over it. I sat through the movie. I don't think I slept, like, for years. because these alien things are like popping out of people's chests, and they're hiding in strange places, and they grab people and tear them apart. And in my bedroom now, right, I'm convinced these things are in the closet. My bed backed up to 2 windows. I think they're just outside the windows. They're under the bed. These things are terrifying. And it was crazy, right? Because I'm kind of afraid during the movie, because it's a pretty cool movie. I like watching it now. I'm not as afraid. But to like a little kid, I go back to my room apart from Dad, and I don't know what's in the room, but I am utterly terrified. These people have just experienced someone they thought they were safe with, and they underestimated him, and suddenly they get a face full of who he actually is, and they can't deal with it. They're filled with great fear. And they said to one another, so notice, they don't even respond to him. They're all kind of like backing up off the edge of the boat, right? Like, leave him in the back alone. Let's just all back up. Do we jump ship? Do we try to get away from him? What do we do? They said to one another, who then is this? So they've been kind of talking, trying to figure out, hey, this guy could be the Messiah. This guy could be a prophet. He actually speaks for God. When he talks, he can offer forgiveness of sins on behalf of God. He kind of speaks like a priest. He kind of speaks like a prophet. This guy speaks for God. That's a big deal. And suddenly, they're like, whew, this is not who we thought it was. This guy is terrifying. Who then, the word then is really important. Because of what we've seen, this changes everything. Because of this guy that we thought we knew, and now we've experienced something radically different, who then is this? So they're starting to ask a bigger question. And notice what they say. That even the wind and the sea obey him. So what Mark is trying to get us to see, and it's easy to miss this with just a cursory reading, just kind of skipping over it, is, wait, this guy may not just be speaking for God. He may not just be using God's authority. Who the heck is this? We have underestimated him. This is not just one other prophet. This is not just some dude. Whoever this person is dangerous. And they're starting to make connections. So in Jewish theology of the time, the sea or lakes were commonly looked at as chaos and as things that were uncontrolled. And so in Jewish theology, the only being that could speak to the ocean and the sea and get it to respond was God himself. That's why the Exodus in the Old Testament is a really big deal, right? God leads these people out, and they get to the Red Sea, and the greatest army in the whole world, from the greatest people in the whole world, is on their tails, right? And then God steps in and says to Moses, this is what I want you to do. Take your staff, put it down, hold it out, speak to the sea, and then suddenly the sea parts, dry land down the middle, and the people walk through, and it is mind-blowingly crazy. That's the point. Only God can do that. And this book called Jonah, which is comically, Mark is telling a story that parallels the book of Jonah. He's doing it on purpose. He's calling us back to this book of Jonah, right? Because in this book of Jonah, this prophet who's supposed to be for God and listen to God and obey God, instead, God tells him to do something, and he's like, I don't think so, right? So he goes and he hops a ship, and God says, go this way. And he's like, I'm going to hop a ship. I'm going the exact opposite direction, right? So he's on this boat. They're out at sea. It says God hurled down a great wind. Literally, it's God threw a huge storm at them, right? And so suddenly, the sea that's calm, they're on this boat, everything's great. Suddenly, storm gets ridiculously crazy. They're bouncing all over. And you know where the prophet is? He's down at the bottom of the ship, passed out, right? So the captain goes down and says, hey, wake up. We're all in danger. We're all perishing, right? Get up, call out to your God. Maybe he can do something. Otherwise, we're all going to die, right? And so they go and they grab this guy, Jonah. He wakes up. He comes up to the top. He kind of begins to explain, hey, I'm supposed to be a servant of the God. It literally says, who made the land and the sea. And then all the guys are like, oh no. You offended the God who made the land and the sea. Now we know what's going on. This is your fault. And so Jonah says, hey, your only solution is this. Toss me over the side. Toss me into the depths of the sea. And the God who controls the sea will be appeased. So they toss him over the side, right? And suddenly, it says, the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. And the sailors, it literally says, feared God. They were very afraid. Not in the sense of, we don't like him, we want to get away from him, in the sense of, whoa, we have serious respect for this God. In Psalm 107, verse 23, actually, I'm not going to read the whole section. I'm going to read 28 through 30. This is a psalm that describes something similar. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. So that's from Psalm 107, written hundreds of years before this happened. The waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. So in this psalm, the idea is there's people out sailing, and they're in trouble because there's a storm, and they cry out to Yahweh, the King of all creation, Israel's God, who rules the earth and sea. And when they cry to Yahweh, Yahweh stops the storm, and everything is stilled, and they're fine. So I want to give you those backgrounds because I want you to know what's going through the disciples' head when they see all this play out. They go crying to Jesus, and Jesus stands up, speaks, calms everything, calms earth and sea, and now they're really terrified. So get what Mark's driving at. Don't miss it. He's not just saying, this is a guy who speaks for God. He is saying, this is Israel's God embodied here and now in the flesh on the earth. And the disciples are starting to get that and get their response, because don't miss it. If this is not you at certain times, you don't get him. Terrified. If you can come face to face with the living God and not be terrified, you are insane or you don't really know what's going on. There are moments when stuff breaks in and we get just a hint that something more is going on. So I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and I was really terrified when they decided to do a movie out of it because I thought, hey, what else can Hollywood ruin, right? Good book. They're going to destroy this. And I remember going into this little tiny theater called the Astro in Clemson University. Terrible theater, like basically dollar movies, and you get what you pay for, right? Because the movie might break halfway through. You never know. There's gum on the seats. You're always, it's just kind of gross. But hey, poor college kid, no money. It's $1. Walk in to see Lord of the Rings, and if you know anything about the story is there's this ring, right, and it's got a ton of power, and this random little guy discovers it, and because he's kind of a nobody, he's kind of a good guy to carry it because it can't control him quite the way it can everybody else. So there's this moment when this little guy finds this incredible ring. It's beginning to exert influence over me. The ring's kind of evil, and I hope I'm not giving too much away. You need, if you want to be a real Christian, or just anyone who is in this world and relevant, you need to read or watch Lord of the Rings. Just saying, right? That's my opinion, but it's true. So there's this moment when this guy, Bilbo, who's been carrying this ring for years, and it's time for him to let it go because it's starting to have a real influence on him. And so the great wizard, Gandalf, is in his house, and he keeps telling, hey, Bilbo, leave it behind, leave it behind. And so Bilbo keeps almost leaving it behind, but not quite doing it. And so Bilbo gets ready to walk out the door, and the wizard Gandalf is there, right? And suddenly, you get this sense that Bilbo may not actually be keeping it. He might just walk out. So he's kind of walking away, and he's like, it's time for me to go. And the wizard says, you need to drop it now. And Bilbo says, well, what if I don't want to? And he kind of bows up to Gandalf. And suddenly Gandalf goes from this humble gray wizard to this huge guy and says, do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. And he gets huge. And suddenly Bilbo is terrified. And he gets humble, and suddenly he's ready to give it up. Because suddenly this guy that he knows loves him deeply reminds him, I love you, but I'm also so powerful I could blow you away in a heartbeat. Remember who I am and take me seriously. And then he says, trust me like you once did. About to cry over that. I don't know why. It's great. It's this beautiful moment. It's this beautiful moment that I think captures beautifully. So there's your, go watch the first movie. It captures beautifully the idea of being confronted by someone so incredibly powerful. They actually terrify you. At the same time, you're reminded, they love me. They're for me. Bilbo Baggins, I'm not against you. I'm for you. I want to help you. And Bilbo remembers, and he eventually drops the ring, and he's good to go. It's a beautiful moment. So, what do we do with this story? Because this is a real experience of real people out on a lake, away from the crowd, it's just their group. They're terrified, real storm, real danger, and suddenly they realize, man, this thing that is in the boat with us, that's far more dangerous than whatever was on the outside. It's terrifying. A couple things to think about. In some of us, there's this idea that if I follow Jesus and I begin following the Bible and I begin living life in a way that God says is good, in a way that pleases him, that things are going to go smoothly and go well and things are just going to work out. So first I want you to know, see it here, in the Bible, that's never reinforced or taught. Notice what happens. These guys are the closest people of anybody in all the earth to Jesus. And what happens? Jesus intentionally, I think, leads them into a storm. He's like, hey, I want just you guys. Let's cross over to the other side on this particular day, right now, just as I am. Let's go. And you know what happens? The storm explodes. And get it, they are in real danger. This is not imagined danger. This is real. And one of the things we need to know as we begin to follow Jesus, as we begin walking, and maybe you've been walking with him for years, maybe you're just on the edge, you got to know right up front, it does not mean you will not go through storms. In fact, I would argue Scripture says quite the opposite. It is a guarantee that storms will come into your life. Your life will have rough points. You will be tossed on waves that you cannot control, and you will be forced to get to the place where you say, I can't control this. This is terrifying, and there's nothing I can do. So notice what it says, following Jesus does not mean a life without storms. And there's a question that kind of comes from that. Why? Why would Jesus allow storms into the life of someone who actually is trying to trust him and trying to follow him? And part of the answer, and we're going to spend a couple minutes on this, is the idea that Jesus, and through him God, if you are seeking him, he will refuse to remain theoretical to you. Meaning this, all of us in our brains have this idea of who God is, right? And we can kind of toy with that idea. We can kind of keep it in a box. And yeah, you know, he's a big deal. I should probably listen to his teaching. I should probably do this. If your God is real, and if you are really seeking him, he is going to confront you, and he is not going to do it through ice cream and cake and happy times. Most likely, he's going to do it by bringing a ginormous storm. And get this, it's because he loves you so desperately much that he will not allow you to live with a theoretical idea of who God is that remains entrapped in your mind and never works itself out into the rest of your life. Why? Because he desperately will fight for a real relationship with you. And real relationships are messy. They're not like a relationship between equals, right? Because you're not dealing with an equal. You're dealing with a real God. A God who calms earth and sea, who causes storms to come, who creates creation. You are not dealing with an equal. So your relationship with him is not going to look like two equals sitting face to face. It's going to look like someone facing you down and calling you out. So a question for you to think about is, do you want a relationship with a real God, or do you want to continue living in a safe, theoretical God in a box who can be contained and controlled? If you follow the real Jesus, he's going to explode out of what you've contained him in. Now, what does that mean for us? Real storms and a real God means, if it's a real relationship with him, he is going to expose that your ideas of what you can control and how you're going to make sure life stays safe and happy and things go in their place, he's going to blow those up. Those things that we think we can control, like as a parent, our kids' lives. If I do this, our kids' lives are going to go this way. If I just do just the right stuff, stuff's going to work out. Or maybe it's your job. If I go down this road and get this education and say the right thing to this person and make this connection and work really hard, all these things are going to be safe. Or maybe it's your health. If I eat organic and drink green smoothies and don't do this bad stuff and work out every day, this is going to happen. And I just want you to know right up front, that's not true. And I'm not saying there's no value in organic food or disciplining your kids, but I just want you to know, you are not God. That's the big point of this passage. You aren't. And for some of us, it's going to take a face full of huge storm till we get that idea out of here and into here, into real life. You are not God. Think for a second. What is it in your life right now, or maybe in the recent past, that's God's way of loving you and saying, hey, guess what? You don't have the control you thought you did. You are not me. You can't control your world. You are not God. And going with that, the idea is this. Real faith isn't just driven by an intellectual understanding of who God is, though that's good. It's actually driven by coming face to face with the idea that I'm not God, and then being driven by neediness. So if God has put you in a situation where things are looking desperate and you don't know what you're going to do, let me encourage you, that's good. That's a sign that he's pursuing you. If things are messed up and jacked up and you're struggling and you're being forced now to pray like you've never prayed before, that's the Lord God Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, pursuing you and saying, yes, come to me. Now we're on talking terms. The only way you can relate to the King of creation is by coming in need. There's no other way. You can't come and say, hey, I've got this. He's going to be like, no, you don't, because that's not who I am. If we're going to be authentic here, I have to be God Almighty, King of creation, who meets needs, and you got to be someone who cannot meet your own needs. Are you being driven to a place of neediness, and is it driving you toward your King? Now, where does that lead us next? If this is you and you're in American culture, this runs against the grain of everything our culture teaches us. We're supposed to be independent people who can hold this thing together. We're supposed to be Lone Ranger Christians who are out doing this. I've got it together. And the whole gospel runs counter to that, and it says, no, that's not the way this works. If God is pursuing you, he is bringing storms and things into your life that cause you to distrust yourself more and actually trust in someone outside of yourself. This runs completely counter to the grain of American culture, and therefore it's sunk deep in our hearts. More than other cultures, I've been to other cultures, they don't have an issue with this like we do, but as Americans, we want our independence, and we want our self-reliance, and we want to be self-made people, and God says, no way in heck am I letting you have that if you're following me. I'm here to blow that up, because if that remains in your heart, it is an insurmountable barrier to knowing the one true God. We have to trust someone outside ourselves. Now, what do we do with this? What's some stuff that we can do? First off, how is God blowing up your life right now? And some of you may say, well, that was a couple years ago. Some of you are saying, man, right now I'm in the middle of this. God's blowing it up. And some of you, it's going to be next week. You're going to get the phone call. You're going to get the doctor's report. Your kid's going to do something stupid. Your husband or wife is going to do something stupid. You are going to do something stupid, right? At some point, it's going to be shattered. And it's usually not a one-time event in people's lives. For me, it happens about every week, right? Something goes down. And what God is doing in that is he is leading you to meet him, to meet the real God of creation in a way that is incredible. It's called prayer. It's this way in which you are being driven, not because simply it's a habit or it's something I need to do, it's a discipline, but because of sheer need and desperateness, God is saying, come to me. So get how God works. God wants you, he wants your life to be in a place where you are driven to him where you have no hope apart from him, so that you might come to him with the right posture. So you might actually be able to meet the real God, so that you might be in a place where you can actually say, whoa, you're God and I'm not. I'm coming to you and you're talking to me. And I want to encourage you, if that's where you are, there's a God of all creation who's ready and willing and inviting you to meet him. And he's doing it with prayer. So I don't know if you guys are readers. My last name is Reader. It was somewhat prophetic because I and my wife and my kids, we love to read. And there's a book, and I'm going to encourage you to read it. It's called The Praying Life. It's by a guy named Paul Miller. If you don't own it or haven't read it, I'd strongly encourage it because it's the story. It's actually a story. It's the best book on prayer I've ever read, and I've read a good number of them. Because it's the story of how a guy becomes, true story of how a guy becomes so needy and so broken because his life gets so jacked up that he begins to be driven into a relationship with the living God. And finding that out, you see joy begin to flood in his life. And as he becomes more desperate, he finds out that God is real. And God begins to meet him, and his life gets transformed. And he sees God answer prayer. Why am I telling you that? Because unless God puts you in a place where you desperately need him to work, you won't ever see him do it, right? Unless he puts us in a place where we desperately need him, we may not ever come face to face with who he is. I encourage you, get the book A Praying Life, and part and parcel with that is if you are in need and you're desperately needy, let me encourage you, one, that's a good place, but two, be driven to prayer. Ask your small group, ask your friends, come and pray with me. And this is why? Because God answers prayer. When we pray, there's nothing more humbling and seems like ridiculous than talking to something you can't see or hear, and yet God answers prayer. There is nothing more powerful the church can do. There's nothing more powerful you can do if you're struggling with Jesus than to pray. It feels, and this is why it's so amazing, it oftentimes feels ridiculous and weak and useless, yet in that humility of us coming and saying, this is stupid, why am I doing this? God says, that's the place that I meet you. Are you praying? Next thing, I encourage you, keep reading Mark. Mark's a great book. I was talking to somebody this morning. It was like, man, this is so cool. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is awesome. Keep reading Mark. See where the story goes. We're going to pick up in about a month. We're going to continue the story. Things are going to begin changing. Stuff's going to get more intense. Crazy stuff's going to happen. Keep reading Mark. You're coming face to face with the real living God, and it will change you. Ben is getting ready to do a series on courage. And courage is kind of the counterpart of what we've been talking about here this morning, which is utter need and humility. Because what you find is as you become utterly needy and utterly humble, utterly dependent on a real living God, you become more and more humbly certain of who he is, and it gives you incredible gumption and courage and strength to do stuff that's utterly ridiculous. And that's called courage. I want to encourage you, come back. Come hear Ben talk about courage from the Bible. We're going to be guys who are put in desperate situations who, through their knowledge of a real living God, do crazy things. Let me pray for us, and we'll be done. Lord God, this passage both is super encouraging because you have grace and patience on people like us who are broken, who are not perfect disciples, who instead are quite the opposite. And you look at them, you're like, how can you still have no faith whatsoever? And yet you don't toss them out of the boat. You hold on to them and you stick with them and you keep sticking with them. And even when they're morons, you don't abandon them. Instead, you do the exact opposite. You stick with them to the point where they deny you and walk away. You stick with them. And then you go to a cross. You lay down your life because you love broken people like us so much. So, Lord, we come to you humbly, and we praise you that you hear and love poor disciples like us. God, would you grant us faith to trust you? Lord, for those who are in incredibly huge storms right now and who are wrestling, God, I pray for them that you would reveal yourself, that you would not, Lord, leave them long without you, but you would draw near, that they would meet you face to face, the living God, and they would know that you are good. In Jesus' name, amen.